Great. Here we are. Welcome, everybody, to New Light Theater Project's Hitler's Tasters first talkback before the show has even started. We have a great panel assembled here today to take up the topic of art attacking tyranny. So I'd like to start us off by introducing the artistic director of New Light Theater Project, Sarah Norris.
Hi, everybody. Depending on where you're tuning in from, good afternoon and good evening, and thank you for joining us today in support of our upcoming production of Hitler's Tasters. As Ken mentioned, I'm the founding artistic director of New Light Theater Project, a company driven by ensemble work with a focus on creating brave and innovative theater. Back in 2017, I was invited to direct a reading of Michelle Kholos Brooks' Hitler's Tasters at Centenary Stage in New Jersey. I don't remember when in the process this was. It could have been the first day of rehearsal. It could have happened after the reading itself. But I remember saying to Michelle, no matter what happens, I want New Light to produce this play next season. And since that moment, I've been on a 5-year journey with this show, which has taken us around the country, overseas, and now back home to New York City. The play is eerily and sadly relevant. In imagining the past, it speaks to our present historical moment through compelling characters and endless theatricality. Plus, it's really funny and shocking. It seduces the audience with a good time, only to have the rug pulled out from under it. I'm constantly surprised of its many layers and diverse audience reactions from night to night. I hope you will join us at Theater Row on 42nd Street starting next week to see for yourselves. It really is a special play. And if you can support this endeavor with your donations, no matter how big or small, please visit newlighttheaterproject.com and click Pledge. Now, it is my honor to invite my colleague, my friend, my collaborator, the brilliant mind behind the play into the conversation. Michelle Kholos Brooks is an award-winning playwright with productions staged internationally and a playwright in residence at New York Rep. Awards and distinctions include the Susan Glaspell Award for Hitler's Tasters and the Riva Shiner Comedy Award for Kalamazoo. Other notable plays are Hostage and War Words, which is scheduled to debut with New York Rep in New York in 2023. Michelle is also a journalist and a mom and a non-resident senior fellow at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you to everybody who's joining. Thank you to this amazing panel for coming out here to support this play that means so much to me. I have written a few plays in my life, but this is one of those that felt like it was literally just handed to me through some other, I don't know, spooky playwright means. I first heard the story of Margot Volk, a woman who says she was conscripted to be one of Hitler's food tasters. And she came out with her story in about 2013, I think. She was in her 90s. And up until that point, nobody had heard this story of the young German women who were asked to taste Hitler's food for poison. And I remember thinking, first of all, isn't adolescence hard enough without having to worry about dying at every meal to taste your food for a tyrant? But also it was just extraordinary for me to think about the fact that Hitler chose young German women to test his food. He didn't choose Jews, he didn't choose gypsies, he didn't choose homosexuals, he didn't choose Poles, he didn't choose the myriad of people that he hated to test his food for poison. He chose women who were supposed to be the bearer of perfect German sons, the future of the Reich. And it got me thinking a lot about the way that young women in general in many societies are held up and then tossed away. It got me thinking a lot about tyranny and how invasive it is, and that no matter how privileged you are, when the tyrant finally turns his gaze, when he's done othering everybody else, he will finally turn his gaze on his own and create damage from there. So all of that sort of hit me, and I decided to write Hitler's Tasters. And so it's comedy, it's dark comedy, but I think it has a lot to say, and certainly in our world in the last few years since I've written the play, it seems to be sadly very relevant. So thank you for coming here to hear about it a little bit, and I will pass this to Ken. I will let you pass it along.
Sure. Do you want to show a little bit of the video from New Light's production now, just to kick us off, and then I'll start to introduce some of our speakers.
You're gonna love this. You can't touch this. Cause I'm a bad bitch. I just wanna have fun tonight. All this shit to the beyond all the flashing light. Let me blow up this house tonight. Blow. We do it like this. You're gonna love this. You can't touch this. Cause I'm a bad bitch. Who do you think? Cause I'm a bad bitch. Who do you think? Cause I'm a bad bitch. Who do you think you are?
Okay, so that's a little taste of what's to come to Theater Row starting later next week. I'd like to invite into the conversation our first guest panelist, who is Susan Stroman, a 5-time Tony Award-winning director and choreographer, whose Broadway credits include a lot. The producers, Scottsboro Boys, Contact, Showboat, Prince of Broadway, Bullets Over Broadway, Big Fish, Oklahoma, Young Frankenstein, Thou Shalt Not, The Music Man, The Frogs, Steel Pier, Big Picnic, Crazy for You. Off-Broadway, The Beast in the Jungle, Dot, Flora the Red Menace, And the World Goes Round, Happiness, The Last Two People on Earth, an apocalyptic vaudeville, which I loved. She is the recipient of the George Abbott Award for Lifetime Achievement. I mean, I love a lot of things, but that one in particular is amazing. A member of the Theater Hall of Fame in New York City. This spring, she returns to Broadway directing the play POTUS, or Behind Every Great Dumbass, or 7 Women Trying to Keep Him Alive, a new farce by Selena Fillinger, opening at the Schubert Theater, where I think you are now, just on a break from rehearsal. So Susan, take it away with some opening reflections on art attacking tyranny. And you also have seen this play, yes.
Well, yes, I think that's mainly why I'm here, because I am a witness to how great this play is. I saw it, I think, Michelle, I'm not sure how many years ago, it was quite a few years ago. I saw a very small production when you were working on it, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then I got to see it this summer again, and I know that you tweaked it a bit, but it really sticks with me, this play. I think it's brilliant, very, also because of what we went through in Washington for 4 years, and now what's happening in the world. All of a sudden, with each passing year, the play becomes more relevant. And so it's very, very thought-provoking. It's directed beautifully by Sarah, of course, and I think your cast members are extraordinary, just incredible actresses. But I just loved how you were telling this very important story that is real, and that kind of revelation for an audience member to realize that this is a true story, but also how you have chosen to be anachronistic at times within your staging and within your writing. It all of a sudden brings it up to date. It makes it unbelievably contemporary. Yet you're telling this story that happened many years ago, but when I watch it, I am connecting with what's happening today. And I know you do that with props and music and such, yet you have the girls dressed in garb from the 40s. And I felt that for someone who directs and stages choreographs, I found that hypnotizing almost. It was mesmerizing just how you brought contemporary and past together as one to make the point of something so horrific that happened can be happening today. And though there's so many things to say, but so there's that, but then it's funny. Somehow you bring a great wit and real comedy to it. It's very true. It's not slapstick in any way. It's just a true witty dialogue to it. So in fact, you, even in a very serious subject, are able to have these laughs that can be uncomfortable and sometimes not. It's just funny. So I do think it's an unbelievable work of art. So I applaud you, and I'm such a huge fan, and I'll be in that front row cheering you on this next production. And that's the main reason that I'm here, because I just adore the piece so much. And it's like one of those, for me, pieces that you fall upon. I mean, I of course I had known you just from our connection with family and such, but I felt like I found it and loved it and have fallen in love with it. So I'm here as a great fan of the work.
Thanks so much, Susan. I'd like to bring on another theater icon into our conversation. Tovah Feldshuh is an actress, playwright, concert artist, author, and 6-time Tony and Emmy nominee. Besides starring as Golda Meir on Broadway, Dr. Ruth Westheimer off-Broadway, and Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in Hollywood, she's enjoyed continuing roles on TV's Law & Order, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, and The Walking Dead. Feldshuh has just completed filming James Gray's Armageddon Time opposite Anthony Hopkins and Anne Hathaway. She's been awarded 3 honorary doctorates of humane letters and is the recipient of the Eleanor Roosevelt Humanities Award, Hadassah's Myrtle Wreath and Mother of the Year Award, and the Israel Peace Medal. Her memoir, Lilyville, Mother, Daughter, and Other Roles I've Played, was named #1 new release in parent-child relationships by Amazon. You can follow Tovah on Instagram, Tovah Felt, ending with a D, and on www.tovahfeldshuh.com. Tovah, thank you for joining us.
Ken, you're fabulous. Please talk at my funeral, but it won't be for many years to come.
Yeah. Long time.
So this masterpiece that we were privileged to look at, when I heard that I was going to see a piece about the war, about Aryan women tasting Hitler's food with cell phones, all I can say is, let me see the video. And that's what I suggest as you fundraise for this brilliant piece. Make sure people see the visual, because the visual really works, Michelle, and that's rare. That's excellent. That's not common. That's very uncommon. So the weaving of the women in garb from their time, doing dancing choreography that can't fully be placed, but looks very modern, and using their cell phones, and stripping down to nothing so that you're in a burlesque where the swastika is on their very ample chests, and they're in short shorts looking very sexual. All works, and kind of in a Brechtian way smacks you in the face about what's happening today with Zelensky, what's happening today with Navalny, this extraordinary hero that stood up to Putin and who was poisoned by Putin, and Putin failed. And hopefully how Putin will fail again in the Ukraine. As Golda Meir says, you can kill many things, but you cannot kill the spirit of man. So what I love about this play is that it's a microcosm of what happens in human nature, and both the good and the bad, that you have Anna, this sweet person who admits to losing her virginity and is then betrayed by Hildy, who's this Nazi bitch, anti-Semite, at least the parts that I have seen, where she suspects this sweet girl perhaps betrays her, and something happens to Anna in the play. Come see it, you will find out. But and then there's a third character, Liesel, tall, glasses, very pretty under the glasses, caught in between these two forces of nature, till another character, Margot, is introduced. But as I was watching the play, I just kept thinking about human nature, about trust issues, about the betrayal of trust. Even when the chips are down, these women are testing whether they're going to be mortal three times a day with Hitler's food. And there is still horrible things they say to each other, particularly the character of Hildy, who sets people up. In all events, a fourth character is introduced named Margot, and comes in with a red coat, reminiscent of Little Red Riding Hood, and being what? Being approached by the wolf. And one of the greatest lines is that one of the characters says, "Didn't you know the Fuhrer is a vegetarian?" I mean, here Hitler is eating the flesh of mankind, is annihilating, committing genocide, not just against the Jewish people, against any recalcitrants, any homosexuals, any Down syndrome, the Slavs, anybody who, the Catholic priests who were up against him, and he's a vegetarian. So Margot says, "I'm serving my homeland, and this is what I get, Brussels sprouts." So this is the treat that you face if you watch this play. It will prick you in so many ways that it will bring you into the present of your own existence. And the minute we watch a piece of art that gets into the river of universal human experience, and we are able to run our own tapes about our own lives, then you're in like Flynn. Then the audience has a real investment in the truth that's being told here. And we're stopped in a moment of time in a black box theater watching this event and coming alive to our own idiosyncrasies or inaccuracies of our own life. So it's quite something, the way you have bridged time and space and canyonized and depth of your play. Congratulations.
Thanks so much, Tovah. As a professional dramaturg and also a historian, it gives me great pleasure to invite a professional historian into this room, who's quite accomplished. Gavriel Rosenfeld is a professor of history and director of the undergraduate program in Judaic Studies at Fairfield University. He's the author or editor of 7 books, including The Fourth Reich, The Spectre of Nazism from World War II to the Present, which appeared in 2019 with Cambridge University Press. He is a co-editor of the forthcoming volume, Fascism in America, Past and Present. He has published many essays in newspapers and journals like the Washington Post. An op-ed just showed up the other day. The Atlantic, The Forward, and the Jewish Review of Books. He is an editor of the Journal of Holocaust Research and edits the blog, The Counterfactual History Review. Gav, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this illustrious panel. Thanks once again. So yeah, I'm the historian on the panel, but I'm gonna pretend to be in the theater business just for a quick second. Behind me is my stage. Actually, it's your stage, Michelle, because this photograph, this is an archival photograph, it depicts the main dining room of Hitler's command headquarters at the Wolfslehr, the Wolfschanze in Rostenburg in East Prussia. Today it's known as Kenshin in Poland, but this is where Hitler stayed for more than 800 days during the Second World War when he was commanding the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front. He was in fact here in Rostenburg from about June of 1941 when the invasion of the Soviet Union began till November of 1944, really just to up until a couple of months after he was almost assassinated by Tom Cruise, who was of course playing Klaus von Stauffenberg in the film Valkyrie from, I don't know, 15 years or so ago. This massive complex was 2.5 square miles in size. About 2,000 people worked there at any given point in time, including 1,500 soldiers with multiple security zones. And that's, of course, where Hitler ate a lot of his meals, which brings us to Michelle's play, because the food tasters, Hitler's tasters, were primarily based in this particular part of the eastern zone of Germany. And I'd just like to say a couple of things about the historical context, perhaps, for the play. Michelle, you and I had spoken about this some time ago when we had a video run through. I think your performers did maybe 2 10-minute excerpts, and this was a Zoom conversation we had afterwards, and that was wonderful. But I just wanted to sort of provide a little bit of a context with regard to the question of historical truth. Anybody in my position who's regularly watching films about the Holocaust or the Nazi period, whether it's Jojo Rabbit or The Boy in the Striped Pajamas or Life is Beautiful, the question always is what's true and what's not. And my first point, I suppose, is that it doesn't matter, because Michelle's play raises all kinds of universal themes, far apart from just the specificities of the Nazi period, universal themes pertaining to how do individuals cope in dictatorships? How do they struggle to survive in dictatorships? And Tovah, just picking up on one of the things you were alluding to, I think for me, one of the most appealing puzzles of this play is whether we're supposed to sympathize with the main characters or whether we're supposed to despise them. And for viewers or audience members who will see the play, of course, that is one of the things I think certainly to be on the lookout for. But I wanted to say just one other thing by way of introduction about the larger fascination with Hitler that Michelle's play also taps into. Really, ever since the 1970s, there's been an enormous amount of attention towards Hitler's entourage. There have been books about Hitler's chauffeur and Hitler's doctor and Hitler's secretary. And Hitler's tasters, in one sense, is just merely the latest example of that fascination. But the question, of course, is what's real here? And Michelle, you were talking about, fascinatingly, how Margot Volk, who first divulged her life story about in the 1940s, how she was one of Hitler's tasters, she divulged this information at age 95. She'd never talked about any of these experiences before. And she definitely had a very, very traumatic history, which I'll leave to the side for the time being. But it got so much attention in the German media that some skeptics came onto the scene and said, you know what, we're doubtful that this ever even really happened. And that gets into the whole question, which is a whole nother issue about Hitler's terrible health throughout his whole life, the fact that he had private cooks for several years, one of whom turned out to have a Jewish grandmother and was fired for racial reasons. She was replaced by another cook. And the question of whether Hitler had tasters who were 12 women, 14 women, however it might have been, however many it might have been, or whether they were involved with the cooks in some kind of complex relationship. The point is from my perspective at least, there is a historical reality, but we may never know what it is. But the fact of the matter is, once we've been enticed by the drama of the theatrical production as a production, it does raise the present day issues of how do we cope with dictatorial regimes, not to mention, all the present day, analogies to Vladimir Putin and him having just fired 1,000 of his personal staff for fear of being poisoned. So, this is the kind of story that has archetypal relevance. And while maybe in our conversation, we can talk more about historical details here and there, I'm happy just to be part of this larger discussion and to contribute to whatever I can.
Thank you so much. Why do we tell stories? Either, investigating history, trying to get the facts in order and placing them in context. Why do we use imagination and tell stories through drama, putting antagonists and protagonists in conversation with one another and explore it that way? And a lot of us would say, oh, we do the work we do because ultimately it matters. We're in the business of illuminating and changing hearts and minds because things matter, because there are real consequences, there are material consequences for people's attitudes and what they do out there in the real world. So I'd like to introduce our final panelist today, who's out there actually trying to make people's lives better. Scott Richman serves as the director of the Anti-Defamation League's largest regional office, covering New York and New Jersey. He oversees the work of the region, which includes incident response, anti-bias education, legislative initiatives, educational programs, fundraising, and leadership development, all designed to fight anti-Semitism and combat hate in all its forms. This is reflected in his weekly national podcast called From the Frontlines. He is an experienced advocate dedicated to developing community partnerships and initiatives that provide justice, equality, and fair treatment for all. So welcome to the conversation, Scott. You have the floor to reflect on anything you'd like to on these opening statements.
Thanks so much, Ken. And really, it's an incredible honor to have been asked and to be on this panel. And I think I'm going to delve a little bit more deeply into how this play is an important example of the idea of art attacks tyranny, which is really your original question. As regional director for ADL, my job is, I think, to describe some of this tyranny and the lessons that we can draw from it in order to fight against it. And more specifically, I think the tyranny that I'm talking about this evening is the tyranny of hate, the hate that led to the Holocaust, the hate that has fueled a tripling of anti-Semitic incidents in this country in less than a decade, the hate that has turned our social media feeds from baby photos and pet photos to really a cesspool of racism, extremism, misinformation, and the hate that fuels extremists on the left and the right. That's really made our society, our country, terribly divided, terribly polarized. This is the sole mission of ADL, and it's a unique mission. And the art of doing this is one which has evolved greatly over many years. And it's really what I want to talk about, the art of fighting back against hate. And there are many ways that ADL does this, but for the purposes of this forum, I want to briefly lift up 4 ideas. And as I listen to the other panelists, I want to talk about how this might relate to Hitler's tasters. So first, ADL has always believed that the best way to fight hate and extremism is to expose it to the light of day. Our Center on Extremism has spent decades finding extremist activity and providing that information to law enforcement and the public. And I can think of no better example of this than the anti-masking laws of the 1950s in 6 southern states. ADL was a big proponent of these laws, and they quite literally exposed these haters to the light of day, and that resulted in a great weakening of the Klan. Hitler's Tasters is certainly doing just that by taking this little-known story of inhumanity and exposing it to the light of day. Second, ADL has always believed that we need to create the world that we want. We believe that it's a world where people respect one another, where they celebrate difference rather than attacking it. And that's why millions of students across the country each year are touched by our anti-bias programs in schools. And the young women in Hitler's Tasters, well, many of them, in many scenes, they look the other way when they were exposed to hate. And the art of fighting hate is helping people to recognize that they can't look the other way, which this play certainly drives home. Which leads me to my third point, which is allyship. Many people associate ADL with fighting anti-Semitism, which we certainly do, but it's not all we do. We're a Jewish organization, but we were founded to fight not only against, in our mission statement, the defamation of the Jewish people, but also to secure justice and fair treatment to all. We believe deeply that hate against one is hate against all. And the young women in Hitler's Tasters, they did not understand this lesson, but with hate against Blacks, Asians, Muslims, members of the LGBTQ+ community, and so many members, so many others on the rise, we must all learn the lesson from this play, the importance of allyship. And just because they're not coming for me does not mean that we should not care. And finally, as we look to the future, ADL is an organization that's scared. We're quite literally scared that it could happen here. You see the book behind me, the red book behind me. It was written by our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt. It just came out a few months ago. What is the it that could happen? The it is the attack on our democratic way of life. The signs are all there of a slide from a full democracy to a more illiberal form. We live in a hyper-polarized society, a society where there are ethno-nationalist divides. And these are really indicia of trouble, along with such illiberal tendencies as attacks on voting rights. And the one thing we know from history is that when you slide from democracy, it's not good for the Jewish people or other vulnerable minorities. And obviously Hitler's Tasters is an extreme reminder of this. And I would just conclude by saying that this is what art can do to tyranny. It can be an incredibly visible and compelling platform for exposing tyranny to the light of day, and then showing a different path forward for all of us. And thank you for the opportunity. I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Scott, and thanks to our whole panel for those opening remarks. I have so many things that I'd like to ask. I think I failed to introduce myself. I'm Ken Cerniglia. I'm a theater maker and dramaturg by trade, but I'm here as a board member of New Light Theater Project and a huge supporter of this play. This hits me in a real sweet spot because I'm also a historian. I love theater that engages history at a particular point in time, plays set in the past, but then imagined theatrically. And why are we doing that? And in one of our prep conversations, bring up that Shakespeare was always talking about the time in which he lived in Elizabethan England, and all of his plays were talking about contemporary politics there, but they weren't set in the time in which they lived. They were set in Verona and a long time ago in ancient Rome. And so one of my questions, and I think that we can, how does art attack tyranny? It unlocks the imagination. It allows us, like all of the things that we're talking about, particularly, in these last several years where everything's polarized, there's so much hot and just keeps coming and continuing. And sometimes we need a break from that. And so how can art give us that break, but also present some ways for our imagination to find some other solutions that hitting our problems that we're living in head on aren't doing in that same way? How does theater complement history? How does the theater going experience complement the direct support work that ADL is doing? So I want to start coming back to Michelle. When you first worked on this play, and then nurturing it in Sarah's production, New Light's production, over time, and then now we're back in this place, right? Like we're in a new historical moment now, and the thing that was a curiosity some time ago is now like so kind of directly engaging our time, but not directly. It's not about Putin, it's about Hitler, right? It's and these young women that he enlisted to taste his food. So I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Well, it started with Hitler, but it just so happens that as I was starting to write the play, it was around the 2016 election. And not to put too fine a point on things, but a lot of the rhetoric that I was hearing in the world was terrifying. And as I'm writing this play and researching some of Hitler's speeches and some of the things that he said, I was hearing the exact same language, on CNN every night. And it was chilling. And so, there's, you having the obvious feelings about the potential of history repeating itself and all of that. But so there was like that context. But I first and foremost actually came to the play because of the young women, and then it graduated into other things. And one thing that happened for me was I was thinking about the play, and I was out somewhere and I was watching a bunch of young women, like in pursuit of the perfect selfie. And it just seemed exhausting, like having to get that exact right angle. And the way they were scrutinizing themselves, and it kind of hit me. These are the same girls that would be conscripted to do this work for Hitler. They're the girls. There's nothing about them except for probably what they're wearing and the fact that they're into the play. Was that I wanted to make sure that these girls didn't feel like historical figures. I wanted them to feel very present. I wanted them to feel like our sisters and daughters and nieces and friends, So I think the great thing about art is that we can mess with all these things and make our points through different avenues. I mean, I still consider myself a journalist, but I was working consistently as a journalist for a long time, and I loved that work. But you know, I was always kind of an emotional mess about what's going on in the world, and you can't write that stuff into your news copy. And so I really find, for me, that to be able to approach these stories like through my emotional experience, I feel like I can actually reach something often that feels more true than you know, than in just telling ripping the headlines. Also, I would say we are so overwhelmed and oversaturated with information all the time now, right? I mean, it's overwhelming. We all get news 24/7 on our phones, and it's coming through a million different devices. And I think the thing about being in the theater is that you're kind of in a claustrophobic space, and we can't really move, and we can't really have a snack, and we can't really be distracted. And so we all have to sort of be there taking this stuff in together. And for me, with this barrage of information, sometimes I just check out. I can't feel anything anymore. But when I'm in the theater, I can feel something again. Or if I'm looking at a piece of art, I can feel something again. And I think that motivates me to action much more so than just hearing a lot of statistics and seeing horrible pictures on the news.
Yeah, and you bring out, obviously, like, you know, what all kinds of writers, right? What's the job of a journalist in telling a story and crafting a story, the first draft of history? Then what's the job of the historian, who is like taking, you know, more context from a little bit further away, trying to make sense out of facts and stories? And then, you know, what's the job of the dramatist? What's the job of the art maker to try to like get at truth in another way, even if it's not the facts that line up? I'd like to throw it to a couple of other theater makers here. You know, I'm thinking about, you know, Scottsboro Boys, and like how amazing that is to take a very dark chapter of American history and break it open and using very theatrical forms, as you did in your production. And Tovah, you know, Golda's Balcony, looking at this amazing woman leader, Golda Meir, like, but not, it wasn't history exactly, right? You interpreted that role as a different kind of approach to it. So how does art, from your perspectives and the things that you've worked on, break open historical engagement in a kind of way that is getting to what Michelle's talking about, sort of finding another way into the truth, that this barrage of facts or misfacts, you know, that we're constantly getting, it frees us up to experience truth in another way?
Yes, I think of Hitler's Tasters a bit like working on the Scottsboro Boys, which is a show that I did, and it was a piece of history that Kander Neb wanted to bring to life, and Fred Ebb always would say, if you don't make it entertaining, they won't listen. So we did what we could to make this story entertaining, so people would all of a sudden realize this piece of history that had mostly disappeared from people's minds. And I think that's what Hitler's Tasters is. It's reminding people, but reminding them through art about what happened and what can happen again. And I think that's, as Michelle said, that's what art does, that it touches you in the heart, you know, so you deal with it differently, you think about it differently, and actually you move on it more so than just having statistics told to you. So, you know, art is everything in making people change their minds and open up their hearts. And so I think as a theater creator, I think that's why I love this play so much, you know, because I was able to relate to it. It has an accessibility to it making an audience sit forward and take it in. And that's what I love about it. But yes, as you say, Ken, it did remind me when I saw it of another group of creators, Michelle and her director and choreographer and such, taking this very serious story, but making it entertaining so the audience will listen.
Tovah, you have some thoughts on that? You've got a lot of experience.
Oh, it's my pleasure. You know, a good actor creates a seamless relationship between themselves, their neshama, which is the word in Hebrew for that which is eternal, that the human soul, that which is eternal in them. It creates a seamless existence between their soul and the soul of the person they're playing. The person you're playing is so important. It's how motherhood helped me. It's more important than you. In other words, when you play Golda, Golda comes first. You don't come first. When you play Dr. Ruth Westheimer, Dr. Ruth Westheimer comes first. She's so optimistic that even the ends of her sentences go up. They go up. Tovah, how are you? I want to know the news, only the good news. That's Ruth. But there's a seamless relationship. And as the actor transforms, if that's the kind of actor you want to be, and that's, I worship at that altar. If the actor transforms, the message to the audience is, if I can do this, think what you can do. If I can be a kid in a small room as an Aryan tasting Hitler's food, think what you can do for better or for worse with your life. You're also, as Michelle said, in a filtered environment where you're in the black box and you are focused on an event in time. The other thing that's very important about this play, the first question that Grace Paley would ask me when I was at Sarah Lawrence was, is it excellent? But if it's excellent, is it original? Is it an original idea? This play is an original idea, even though it's an historical fact. Or maybe it isn't an historical fact, Gavriel, but I don't care because it affected me and it engaged me. I go further than Fred Ed. It's not just entertaining. How does the actor with the director, you know, of the caliber of Susan, how do you engage the audience? I saw Prayer for the French Republic at the Manhattan Theater Club. I was totally engaged. And that's the first way I judge something. So this play also is an original idea to begin with. It shines a light on human nature in such a deep way that, as I mentioned before, you start running your own tapes. And the actors are good enough to create a seamless relationship between themselves and the characters they play. I mean, that Hildy person, believe me, I would rather never have a meal with that person ever in my whole life. That woman is so effective as an actress. So that's how we do it. We beckon the audience into a distilled vision filled with distilled images that have been curated, that have been carefully curated for them. Because in the end, though Ruth Westheimer or Golda Meir or Bader Ginsburg, I said to the Prime Minister, to the Supreme Court Justice, I'm going to be your voice out in the theatrical universe. How do you want to be remembered? And she went like this. She went, I want them to know I'm funny. Get better in your life. I said, you're in good hands. So anyway, besides, once you are the parent to your character and they come first, then what comes first after that is the house. It's the audience. Can they hear me? Can they see me? Am I there for them? Yes, they must lean forward, but why? How precise am I with my distilled imagery? What am I doing? What can I cut out? What can I edit? Am I lying? You know, if the audience shakes their program, you're lying. You're up there. When I teach, it's the first thing I say. If they're muching around, you have to take responsibility for that. So anyway, that is how art fights tyranny, because it distills its own truth, maybe in a form of memoir versus scientific fact. And it beckons the audience to look at a moment in time and then take quantum leaps in those times to apply it to their own present life.
Thanks, Tovah. You know, as you were talking, I was thinking that, you know, these three iconic women that you've played and interpreted and shined a sort of another light, another perspective, as you put the character first and the actor goes back, but the art is shining this light on the thing that we don't know about the icon. And as you're talking about these, you know, these women are heroes in a way, but we're talking about Hitler's tasters and a tyrant. And what Michelle has done in his play, in her play, is talk about the other people, right? Not the tyrant, but the victims, and the other things that we're trying to do in telling new stories is another perspective, right? Not the loudest one in the room, but you know, what are the marginalized voices? What are the marginalized stories, and how can we illuminate them? And I want to sort of throw it to Gav a little bit, because you were saying like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's a fact, you know, like what's the emotional truth under that? But you know, looking at this story, like who, as Michelle said too, like these young women were a footnote, right? When we think about telling this story from, you know, this tyrant of World War II who's larger than life, you know, he was a man but did a lot of destruction. And so what's the way of sort of going back in when you're telling a new a play or a new history, like what are those details that you bring in and telling the story anew? And what do you see in this play here from a historical perspective of just like no one's told this story?
May I just say before Gavriel
go ahead.
jumps in, that again, Michelle, is a wonderfully original idea, to take the little man, in this case, 3 Aryan adolescents, and we're dealing with menstruation, virginity, and I mean, that idea of taking the unseen, the backseat person, and putting them in the limelight was terrific.
So Tovah, you must have been reading my mind, because I was just going to make a point about the unseen. So let me just backtrack. I've written several books about Hitler, specifically about his portrayal in Western popular culture, in film, in play, in theater, in comic books, you name it. And when I think about how art and artists have attacked tyranny, you can obviously go back to Charlie Chaplin's Great Dictator. You can go back to Arthur Schick's great political caricatures in the realm of art. And see how Hitler was in fact depicted oftentimes very demonically for understandable reasons. And then when you go into the 1970s and you think about how major actors like Sir Alec Guinness, or more recently Bruno Ganz, or even Armin Mueller-Stahl portrayed Hitler in some very iconic films, of course he's always front and center, he dominates the screen. Michelle, you know where I'm going with this. Hitler is invisible in Hitler's Tasters. He's an absence. He's not part of the play at all. And yet his aura of menace, his aura of danger, of course, pervades the entire play. Almost, if I can go out on a limb and make the point that, you know, he's kind of an inversion of, you know, the second commandment in the Hebrew Bible, where you're not supposed to depict God because he's stronger than strong and holier than holy. And in a way, I think by not making him part of the actual play, you're underscoring something even more monstrous about him, namely that sometimes, and I'm not obviously in the theater nor am I in film, but sometimes you want to leave the monster unseen. It's scarier when the monster is left invisible. So I don't know if whether, Michelle, I'm not trying to be the interviewer here, but if whether that was a conscious decision from the beginning, or whether once you realized you were omitting Hitler from the play, whether that became kind of a focal point in and of itself, because it is effective. And Tovah, as you pointed out, it's the little people, the cogs in the wheel that keep the totalitarian system going, that are the primary focus, but you never can forget that they are in the service of the monster.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, first of all, I did not want to see that guy again. You know, like just straight off, I didn't want to see that. We've seen enough of that guy. I didn't want to see that guy again. But yeah, for me, this was always about the girls. This is always about the unseen. This is always about the, you know, the ones that we never get to know what happened to them. There's so that, I mean, in war and in conflict, I'm sure in Ukraine right now, there are so many untold stories, people that we'll never know about. And so that was far more interesting to me, and far more important to me than to bring, you know, than to bring in Hitler. But, you know, even as I was writing it, like the less he was there, the creepier it felt, because he was never there, but he was always there. And sort of this, you know, this he was kind of a father figure to them. Like in the play, he's sort of a father figure in ways, like a sexual figure. He's kind of like a movie star. He's all these complicated things that these men become for young women when they're raised on him. So they're really, I don't really, looking back, I don't really think there was a point where I sort of debated whether Hitler would be there or not. But some people have asked me why I never brought him in, and my first reaction was like, enough. Like I don't want to see this guy at all. I don't want to see this guy on stage again. But the girls, it's all about the girls.
I also think the rule makers of Greek tragedy completely agree with you, or Greek plays. They never put the murders on the stage. If you look at Oedipus, stuff like that, where, and then of course, if you don't contain him, as Gavriel says, you are investing in the audience their ability to ideate this horror, this monster, or this movie star, or this sexual object, or this father figure themselves. And that's very good.
You know, I was thinking too, you know, you're saying like, I don't want to see him, right? Like, I don't want to, and yet the title of the play is evoking his name. We've been talking about that, like we're putting an asterisk in it just so it doesn't get flagged, because this name has been evoked as a sort of, you know, an icon, a rallying point for hate, for white nationalism, for neo-fascism. And we have to think about these things too. And I'd like to, you know, pull Scott in here for that. Like we all know that stereotypes, that depictions out there in popular culture and in fiction and in speech can cause real damage out there. And so, you know, what are the things that we can do to help open up conversation, to welcome people in, to tell these other kinds of stories, and what role does art play? And the thing that I think at least everyone on this panel, hopefully our guests here too, like we want the world to become a better place. How can the art that we engage in, how can the social work that we're engaged in, how can the histories that we're writing help make the world better, help make it more welcoming, and help protect people? And so Scott, I'll just throw it to you. And also, as we wrap up, we've got about 7 minutes left. If anyone who's attending, if you've got any questions, throw them into the chat and we'll see if we can get to a couple of them as we wrap up. Scott.
May I say before Scott, I have to, being the theater animal that I am, I have to go back to technical rehearsals, but how much I love being on this panel, meeting all of you. And I do adore this play, Michelle, and I can't wait to see it again. So all the best to all of you. And I'm back out at the tech table. So thank you so much.
So see Hitler's Tasters and see POTUS. Go back to tech rehearsal. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So, you know, you bring up this issue of stereotyping and sort of one-dimensionality. I was listening to Tovah when she mentioned Prayer for the French Republic. So not only did I see that show, but I did a talk back. So I'm on stage, and the very first thing that I said was, what was so brilliant about this show was that it wasn't like that. It wasn't one-dimensional. It showed a portrayal of the Jewish experience with incredible depth, but also with incredible nuance. And I think that this is what this does as well. When you're portraying somebody like Hitler, you're probably portraying this sort of larger than life figure without the nuance. But Michelle decided not to do that. She's showing these individuals that have you know, very, very varied personalities and very varied thoughts on all of these issues. And that, I think, is what's going to dispel the stereotyping, is the nuance. You know, I do a lot of trainings on anti-Semitism. And when I talk about anti-Semitism, I don't talk about it as mere hatred towards Jews. I break it apart. I make it real for people and how people are experiencing anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a series of conspiracy theories, of tropes. There are actually 7 tropes that make up anti-Semitism, and it's very well defined, and it's very different from other forms of social prejudice. And I tell people, if you want to understand what anti-Semitism is, if you want to be an ally to people in the fight against anti-Semitism, you need to understand what triggers people. You need to understand the nuance. And when statements are made about Jews being in control of the media, of government, of business, or associating Jews with greed or money or things like this, sometimes those can come across as sort of very light kinds of attacks. People don't see it that way. But if you understand the context, the nuance, that this is what Jews have been experiencing for millennia, and that it therefore triggers people, then you'll understand what anti-Semitism is, and you'll be able to be a better ally. And I think it's all about the nuance. It's all about understanding the depth of this rather than the one-dimensionality.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think that's, one of the things that we can tackle in the theater is try to welcome in that conversation, right? Like that I think our job is obviously to protect people from harm, but not necessarily from discomfort. That sometimes in the theater, we need to sort of bring up some of the subjects that are difficult with the goal ultimately of empathy, but we have to talk about it, and we have to talk through it, and we have to stay in the room to get to a place where there is that sort of understanding at the end. How am I a good ally? But you have to understand that experience first. And when you're just inundated with facts all the time, it doesn't really unlock. It's sort of when you can get into a story, and then the emotions unlock, and then the understanding can happen in a new way. There's a question in there, I believe, from your husband, Michelle, about any nods
in the other room.
we make, as in the other room through the chat. Any nods that we make, like obviously we put up a play, but we're telling it live every night, and then something will happen, right? And the context shifts a little bit, and do you acknowledge that when the context shifts and there's new relevance in a play?
Yes, and he is not a plant. I did not know he was going to put a question. But yeah, one thing about the experience of this play that's been amazing is the play was first launched in 2018, and so much has happened. And I've been fortunate to work with this extraordinary group of women, the 4 actresses, Sarah, an all-female cast and crew, by the way, all female, all conceived of by Sarah. And they were so game to adjust the play as we went along, to acknowledge what's kind of happening in society right now. So we were like, for instance, we were all together when the Kavanaugh hearings were happening. And I said, we were all very distraught, so I said, like, how about if we write in like a little nod to Christine Blasey Ford, like, are you all game? And they said, yeah. And so we just put in a little something, you may catch it, you may not, but it was our way of being able to acknowledge her. COVID, sort of hard to ignore, especially because it closed us down the day after we opened in LA. But we added a little something in about viruses. We were in the Hamptons when for the 20th anniversary of September 11th, and we put in a little something for that. And so that everybody has been very game to add little pieces to give these nods to contemporary society. The play was just in North Carolina and at Calliope Stage, and it's when the war started. And I said, how are you all feel about putting a little something in there to stick it to Putin? And they were all game. So we have a little something in there for that. And I don't want to do too much. I don't want to upset the apple cart. I don't want to, give the actors a lot of stress, but when we have an opportunity to offer something from us, then they've all been game for taking that opportunity. I've been very, very grateful for that. I will also say that there have been a lot of weird coincidences. And I think mostly it's just been because of historical research, but I've had people say to me, because when the play first launched, there was a lot of conversation at the border about children being separated from their parents. And there's, of course, conversation in the play about children being separated from their parents. And people said to me, like, how did you know children would be separated from their parents? And I said, well, I didn't predict anything. All you have to do is look back in history. So the play is evolving, but also all you have to do is look back to know what can happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the thing that Tovah brought up too about, to look at the video, and that this is obviously based on historical research, but this is an anachronistic take on a storytelling, right? Both in your writing and in production. And so this like constant play between then and now, which is ongoing. And I feel like it must feel like you're treading water a little bit, trying to sort of keep up with the times, because this play just is like more relevant every day. So we are at time. I wanted to remind everyone, thank you all for coming. Please come see Hitler's Tasters. You can get links to tickets at newlighttheaterproject.com. I believe the play has a website, Hitler's Tasters Play .com. You can find it, but also part of the reason for us gathering today was to raise some funds, right? Ticket sales don't cover all of the costs of putting on this play, and we feel like it's really important to bring it to New York City right in this place in time, to gather community, to investigate these topics, and to be able to move to act. So we're happy to have Scott here and direct attention to support the great work that ADL is doing, because it's so important. So please donate to the project. Please buy tickets, come see it. We're going to be doing a series of talkbacks, and there's information on those websites about the series of live talkbacks. So I want to thank everyone: Michelle Kholos Brooks, Tovah Feldshuh, Gavriel Rosenfeld, and Scott Richman, and Susan Stroman, and Asedcha, and Sarah Norris, whose screen has gone black. But thank you all for coming today. This was a really rich conversation, and I look forward to gathering again and continuing the conversation in the good work in art attacking tyranny.
Thank you, Ken.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.